The station ID is an FCC requirement to television and radio stations that they must identify themselves with their call letters at the top of every hour.
I remember as a little boy with my older brother, we would be up late at night and we would have our AM radio and we'd be searching the static for CKLW.
In Arkansas, there was KSOH.
Yeah, KDKA TV2, WTAE Channel 4, and they were always Channel 4, and KDKA was TV2.
WHLO, 640 AM. AM was king in those days. Uncle Joe Cunningham, Top 40, British Invasion, The Beatles, Dave Clark 5.
But WBTV was the big TV station. Ways Radio, WAYS, that was the big radio station that introduced me to rock and roll.
So I used to love the local news, of course, even as a kid, which is really weird. If you're a child who is into television at that age in that way, it's not normal.
I can remember in the 60s when we finally got our second radio station, and it was a rock and roll station.
There was one station in Cleveland, it was WWWE, which is kind of a tough call sign to say every time you got to say it. So they started calling it 3WE.
On a good night, you could get WGN out of Chicago, the world's greatest newspaper, WGN.
When you establish a call sign for your radio station or television station, you get that assigned to you from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, but you get a chance to submit some. I'd like this one, and if you don't accept this one, this is the next one I'd like to try. But when you get one, what you're going for is something that's easy to say and easy to remember. WTLW-TV is a good call sign, if for no other reason than it's a collection of consonants. They seem to work better.
That legal station ID, you hear it at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour. It just tells you where you are on the dial.
This is WTLW-TV, Lima.
I love that we're telling this story. I think this story needs to be told because there are many people who won't believe it when they hear it.
It was kind of like David and Goliath. You know, we felt like it was us against the world at times.
That a small Christian TV station could make such an impact, not only on the community, but on the culture, the way that this station has and is doing. People need to hear it so that they can do more of it.
I don't think people realize how crazy this was, that this was even happening in the first place. And it's really good to tell this story because it is a David and Goliath type story.
About 30 minutes after I met my husband, Ron, I realized that his main love in life was broadcasting. And his main goal in life was serving the Lord, and he wanted to combine the two.
I got into radio having been healed of stuttering just 2 weeks before. And I went through the worst interview anyone has ever had in the history of man. Are you a writer? No, I didn't do that well in English. I was a freshman in Bible school. Are you an engineer? I think he had 4 things. Are you an announcer? I said, no, I've only been talking for 2 weeks. He looked at me and so strange. He thought I was pulling his leg.
Well, we were in San Francisco. Ron was in radio. And we were just asking the Lord where we should be. And the station in Lima, Ohio, needed a manager. He applied for the job, and the Lord just put that on our hearts. People would say, you actually moved from San Francisco to Lima, Ohio. And we were all happy about it. We said, yes. We thought it was great. That's where the Lord sent us.
Well, some people, Lima, Ohio, Lima, lost in middle America. There's been a lot of businesses that have closed, going through some tough times. It's bounced back. Midwest, down to earth. I think it's a great place to live. Ron was a radio guy. I think he had the old radios that he collected, had a few of those.
He had a passion for radio. Any town he went to, he'd look up the radio station, and he would go in and meet people and so forth, see what the studio looked like.
Ron had this gift that he could attract really amazing, talented people.
Ron, John, Keith, Miriam, and eventually Scott Young.
He was amazing at being able to rig stuff up and fix stuff. I mean, he could fix anything, I think.
I'll never forget, we had a little Volkswagen and lost the key, and the dealer said, we can't make another key. I don't know why that was, but he thought to himself, I can make a key. So he went home and made a key. I don't know how he did it.
When I think in terms of Ron, quality, obviously, on everything that he did. If we're going to do this, let's do it for Jesus. Let's do it right.
FM stereo was a whole new thing, and it was well recognized that WTGN was one of the best sounding stations in the area.
Boy, I mean this kindly, but my story isn't complete unless I say I was getting bored with radio. And radio had been my first love. So there just weren't enough new challenges for me. I'm not trying to build myself up. I'm just saying I was frustrated. And TV, wow, that'd be something.
The truth is, early on, the church embraced media in a really powerful way. And most people don't realize that between about 1898 and about 1914, literally the birth of the movie industry, the church produced more films than Hollywood did. You know, as Hollywood started to get more violent, started to have more sexual content, the Hays Code came in and they started restricting what TV stations and movie producers could do. And the church saw this happening, and the church started to slowly back out.
In my day, coming up as a child, they looked at TV and some people would call it the one-eyed demon.
And it was only a pioneering group of pastors and leaders that started to rethink this whole model and talk about why it needed to happen.
Be ready, because they're going to bring cable in the household.
In the late 70s, early 80s, there weren't a lot of channels to watch.
Christian television over the next 10 years changed drastically because stations began to emerge.
In Pittsburgh, Cornerstone Broadcasting was the same way. These weren't ministry leaders. These weren't pastors for the most part.
Russ Bixler, living in the city, was a pastor, resigned the pastorate, started the television station. I think it was 1977.
Well, there was a man named Les Raker who was starting a television station in Manassas, Virginia, and he had a vision somehow for Lima. And he called Ron, and they talked about it.
And he said, Ron, you ought to pursue this frequency that's available. And I knew very little about it. We could turn this thing around whereby it would become a normality to have something coming across the screen that glorified Jesus Christ, made clear the plans of God, and we'd see souls saved. That's the vision I had for it.
13 till 4 here from Bright New World on WTGN Radio.
You see, this started out as a project of WTGN Radio.
The temperature has fallen to 60. The time at the tone is 4 o'clock.
He said, you know, we need to look at going into television. I could read the intent of his heart, and I realized he really had a vision for this.
And my understanding was that it was going to be WTGN TV. That's what people were committed to.
They had a share-a-thon at one time that after the share-a-thon was over, he had told the audience, if we raise enough money, we will look into going into television.
The first monies for TLW were monies that came from the ministry of WTGN.
There are a lot of things that have to be done. Number one, you have to get a license approved by the FCC to have a frequency that may be available in your area, which was Lima in this case. He dove into that like, you know, fish diving into the water, I guess. He took to it. You have a certain amount of time to apply for a license. There's what they call a cutoff date. And you can, when that cutoff date happens, you can, and you're the only person applying for it, you sign the papers probably the next day, and the license yours.
This is the nature of the beast. When someone files a frequency that's at all viable, there are thousands of people almost that jump on and say, hey, me too, me too.
Here it came the day before the cutoff date, and I remember him walking up to me, and he wasn't hungover, but he just didn't have the lilt that he normally had that morning. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, well, we've had another interest apply for our license. And I could see my heart sank, his heart sank, but like in everything else he did, he just kept working on it.
44 and radio were to be married, but the board of directors at radio said, we don't think so. And so let's end this. And I said, I'm committed, gentlemen.
Look at anybody that God called into the ministry, and you will see that God always called them beyond what they are capable of doing themselves.
And ultimately, I do believe that WTGN was gracious in saying, okay, we're going to make this commitment to the TV station with this beginning monies, which at the time was pretty significant.
That's where our first $540,000 came, without which we would not have existed.
He went through some very trying times, but he never gave up. And I think a lot of that had to do with Becky and her support and knowing that she was behind him every step of the way.
The problems that come up matter, but you don't give up on them.
I had a unique perspective growing up. Both of my parents looked at things as, what's it going to take to get this done? Not, oh, we can't do that. Oh, no, this might happen, this might happen, this might.
I've spent my entire career working with Christian program producers, Christian broadcasters, Christian filmmakers, and I can tell you that probably the distinguishing mark, the ones that really capture the greatest audience, the broadcasters and producers that make the biggest impact, are people with a real serious vision.
So now it's been 4 years. There's no FCC license even on the horizon. Ron's had to resign from WTGN Radio and form a new board. But that's where we get ACTS Incorporated, American Christian Television Services.
When we say we're an independent Christian television station, here's what that means. We're not affiliated with a specific denomination. We're not connected to one specific church.
Ron Mile had the foresight to establish a board of directors composed of community members.
And he chose a friend of his who was a businessman, Larry Sheets, and he chose another friend of his who was very big in education in Allen County, Andrea King.
You know, I remember Larry Sheets coming to me and saying, I want you to meet Ron. Through listening to Ron and hearing his vision and his passion for Christian television, I guess I always said I adopted his vision. And so when they asked, I said yes.
He said, well, I want people around me that are going to keep me in check. He goes, it's not good to go without some accountability.
Ron had the startup money, and now he has the board of directors. What he needed now was the construction permit from the FCC saying you could start building a station.
I can remember we were in his office.
And the time came and went when they could cross-file, that's called. And so it was, quote, our frequency.
I think Ron almost jumped over the desk.
So finally, we had some good news, and we also found out that the FCC approved the call letters, WTLW, which stands for Witnessing the Living Word.
Then the clock began, and we had to get that station built within a certain amount of time.
A huge part of the TV44 story is that 90-year-old airport hangar that Ron chose to be our main studio.
Northwest Ohio has been incredibly blessed to have what I think is probably the largest TV studio around, maybe even in the state.
Oh, wow. My goodness. I forget how big this room is. We had it so full with so many different sets to conduct a telethon that it betrayed its size. This is huge.
When Ron Weil chose that location, he knew exactly what he was doing.
When you are in a studio, you want to create some depth of field for really good television production. Well, it's hard to do if you have a small room. You can take shortcuts to make things happen, and it just kind of cheapens the way things look. God's not a cheap God. God He's elaborate in the things He does. Look at the things that He created along the way on this earth. I mean, the earth itself shows you that. It's just amazing.
I'd been shopping, and I knew about this place. That whole side of the wall was gone because that's where the big overhead door came, and DC-3s would come in here.
I mean, I remembered that the airport, because I had a cousin who actually landed Lake Central Airlines, would land his planes here at this airport.
He realized that would be perfect for television because it was clear span.
To anyone who doesn't understand, there's no posts holding up the ceiling to get in the way of camera shots. And I thought, that's nice. I went out and kicked the dirt, and chased the pigeons out. This was pigeon heaven.
I remember thinking, there's a lot of work to be done here.
Everybody else would have thought, tear it down, raise the whole place, sweep it aside, put it in a big hole someplace, and build a nice little building that looked like a television station. Ron could see it finished, and nobody else could see it finished. He kept saying, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. But okay, if you say so.
I thought, this has possibilities.
To understand the size of this hangar, it was under 5,000 square feet of potential TV studio. In comparison, both The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon and Late Night with Seth Meyers are shot in 30 Rock, and studios about the same size. So this little TV station would have a network-sized studio. All we needed to do now was have volunteers come in and transform it from a hangar into that studio.
And the people thought nothing of just giving of their time. Bless their hearts. We would have been way behind financially.
My husband spent so much time here. He said this was almost our second home.
I remember thinking, wow. And I saw this monster in my vision, and we fed him equipment, and we fed him money, and we fed him costs of employees, and we fed him all this stuff, and then he went, burp, feed me. He just never ends. And that's how I saw TV back then. It's incredibly expensive.
Well, here we are again, out on the job site, soon to be the studios of WTLW Channel 44.
He began doing little shows on cable TV. He was doing this behind-the-scenes thing, and people were starting to come in line with him and started sending gifts in.
Just as you hear the sounds in the background of construction, this is proof of the fact that we really will have a Channel 44 studios here very shortly. How about we take a tour? Would you like to join me? Thank you. Come right this way. It's a little less than attractive working conditions, but we have a vision for a finished product here. And as I just indicated in the other room, This will soon be a real, live, honest-to-goodness Channel 44 production house and television studio, and it will be Lima's, and it'll be yours.
I mean, if this station was going to get built, it was going to have to be way under budget. But fortunately, we had Ron.
Ron could get on the phone and talk. I could hear him talking to somebody about how he's going to get cameras and what we could do.
He could get something for nothing if anybody could.
I think our original cameras came from a television station that went black in Puerto Rico.
Some things worked, other things were great boat anchors.
Everything was used, including our 700-foot tower. Ron found it down south in Alabama.
We trucked it up here, and it was all in fine shape.
Back in 1981, the projections were it was going to take $2 million for TV44 to sign on the air.
Ron did it for about half that.
How in the world can you do it? Oh, I said it's easy. If you've got $1.3 million and that's all you have, then you build your station.
The other thing that Ron built during this time was an amazing staff. It was really kind of a dream team of talent. It started off with Ron, and then Roger Rhodes, our program director.
He taught television production on a college level.
If I have had any success in Christian television, it's due to Roger Rhodes.
Keith Curtis moved back from Florida to be part of TV44, and his talents were writing, shooting, editing. Miriam Nungester followed Ron over from WTGN, and her gift set was communicating with our partners and letting them know what was going on. And John Marshall was the chief engineer at WTGN FM. He knew transmitters, and he was our chief engineer.
John Marshall came into what I thought was just a huge, mess.
But we had one bonus player. He was an engineer by the name of Tom Stoffel. He came in from Pittsburgh, and he knew how to build TV studios. And he took the old 60s and 70s equipment that Ron had purchased used and made it connect to the brand new equipment we had purchased.
They would work long, long, hard hours because it was a passion, and it became a passion for them.
I don't know all that Ron went through, but you could see it wear on him sometimes. He was tired, but he wouldn't say it, but you could see it.
The secular community was actually pretty excited about a new venture in town, but some of the churches were not actually behind us.
And there were times that we went through some very rough times.
I'll be frank. We had a lot of opposition from the Christian. It's tough to talk about. But there were members of the Christian community who said, this will never fly.
Christian television was a challenge in the minority community. Even for myself, being a representative of Christian television, I was challenged by some of my own community as to why I was involved with TV44. And I had to share with them, I knew it's what the Lord wanted for me, and I believe that's where I could serve Him.
I wasn't careless, but I really didn't care if they thought we shouldn't do this because I got my information from a higher source.
TV44 knew that we were going to be challenged. Our dream was to bring people together, and yet we know that Satanists didn't want that.
When we come together as Christians, we're unbeatable. That's how come the devil doesn't want us to do it. He does not want us to come together.
And then there were continual delays. We had to get the 705-foot tower constructed. We had to get a transmitter in so we can get tests going on that.
Then Ron came to us one day and said, we are going to sign on the air June 13th. Everybody went, you could have sucked the air right out of the room. We thought that we can't be ready in that amount of time.
Then about 2 weeks before sign-on, Ron and John Marshall fired up the transmitter. Ron grabbed a notepad and wrote this note, and it was the first picture ever broadcast on TV44.
The night before TV44 signed on the air, it was a little bit magical because, at least in my mind, all these years that had led up to this event of signing on the air. And that night, I remember Keith Curtis and John Ondo and John Marshall and Roger and Miriam and there were volunteers everywhere trying to get things ready for that day of sign-on.
Roll clean. Bumper. Big one.
When we signed on, that was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting at the control board. I was the first director when we signed on. And I remember as though it was yesterday, all of the emotion and the hard work just came rushing in all of a sudden. We're counting down 10, 9, 8. And just as we got down, tears began to well up in my eyes. I could hardly talk. And I pushed the fader forward and said, cue him. And I don't know, it just all came upon me and I almost collapsed at that moment. I was so touched and I was so moved by the moment. This that we worked so hard for so long is a reality. We're on the air.
Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns all music but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King through all eternity.
Ron wanted to have really creative ideas on how to attract an audience wider than the church audience.
Well, there always has to be the first show.
And so our first production was a show called Tools and Tips.
Now I hope your lamp doesn't have this many parts to it.
They decided I should be the host. I was in construction, but I wasn't the handiest guy.
My first impression of Bob was that the man had perfect hair.
It took all day on a Saturday to complete one little half-hour program.
But somehow we pulled it off.
I can just see my wife right now laughing at me.
I mean, that said tons right off the bat that the first show coming out of TV 44 wasn't some stained glass church lady show with fake plants. It was Bob using hammers and tools and talking about Jesus.
We didn't know what we couldn't do then.
Someone come up with the idea of a program for children, and it took this form.
Hi, I'm Shannon Wade.
And I'm Jenny Miles.
Each episode was a child telling the story. And it was so well received that other stations began to pick it up.
I mean, we were hitting it right off the bat. We had a nationally syndicated children's show being produced in Lima, Ohio. And then the next thing we know, we found out that the National Religious Broadcasters had honored us with the Station of the Year award.
Station of the Year. We weren't in a box, and we could just reach out and do this and try that and reject this. And we had some programming that was pretty valuable.
Local. I remember him using that word so often.
And now here we are today, broadcasting from a facility that some thought was only a pipe dream. We know it's a dream that has been fulfilled.
Back in those days, there wasn't really a model for Christian television.
It was exhilarating from my standpoint, because I felt like we were making a difference. We were doing something that no one else I knew was doing.
I remember Roger Rhodes, he had a show, Close-Up Reports.
Well, I spoke with Ron and explained to him that I'd like to do a program about news issues that from a Christian perspective.
And all I remember was the budget was, $9. I said, if you can do it, do it. And man, Roger did it.
There's a local group that's doing what they can to make the hospital stays for children a little more pleasant. They deliver teddy bears to hospitalized children.
Well, when we would deal with controversial issues involving or engaging the community, could be a Plus.
Club, we have 1 or 2 open lines, as I understand it. Right now, we have another caller standing by to be put on the air. Hello?
Yes.
So we opened the phone lines. That can be a risky thing. They weren't tape delayed.
Medical Association, I am sad to report, has taken a position of opposition to measures which would end legal abortion.
On the next Close-Up Report special, Roger wanted to take on the issue of pornography and the impact that it has on our culture. On the panel, he invited a local pastor, a psychologist, and a publisher of a local periodical that was focused on the music and nightclub scene in the area. Roger wanted to make sure it was not a one-sided discussion.
I'm interested to know what you think. Yes.
Pornography has always been here. It's been here since prehistoric times.
Well, I have to ask the question, if you take that point to its logical conclusion, then anything that's been around for a long time, we must allow to proliferate, simply because it's been here for a long time. Is that what I see, the underlying logic here in the argument?
No, I'm being pragmatic about it.
I see.
Prostitution has been around forever. We still haven't eliminated it.
This was amazing. This wasn't preaching at people. This was having a discussion, and that's a methodology that Jesus used all the time. So in 1984, we were doing close-up reports, we were doing live election coverage, and then we had a young journalist who joined our staff, and her name was Lisa Bowers.
I was intrigued by a Christian television station being in Lima, Ohio in a cornfield. I loved being in the media. And so I just thought I would help out and volunteer, and that's how I got started in it.
So we almost immediately began to build shows around Lisa and her gifts. She was a great interviewer, and she loved to tell the stories that the community cared about.
Evidently, just because a diet book is popular doesn't mean it's medical truth.
We also had vision for being a part of the community and presenting right from wrong and presenting issues that were of concern in our communities.
But it was an insistence on striving to get things presented correctly.
Those first few years after sign-on were rough, but they were exciting.
We just did things because it sounded fun and creative.
Then there was the time we decided we'd do a program called Just for Fun.
This is Just for Fun.
I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved.
During that time, we had a lot of shows that I like to call one-hit wonders. Time for You, Just for Fun, Outreach, Talk It Over. They were all great shows, but they all came to a quick end. And the reason that always happened was we had to shut down the studio to do telethons. And our telethons, I believe still to date, were our largest productions TV 44 ever produced.
Because we're nonprofit, you need the public support to operate, and that's what differentiates us, and it always has, from network television.
How come you guys are always asking for money? All I ever hear is you guys asking for money.
Nothing you watch on TV is free. Nothing. You have to pay for it by sitting through commercials, or you have to pay for it by paying for it directly.
And early on, Christian broadcasters recognized that advertising was not the path to go, because if you're preaching the gospel, you can't have a local real estate company or a car dealership or whoever's sponsoring your program to tell you what you can and cannot do.
So we're really accountable to the people who donate to this ministry, and if it wasn't for that, we would not exist.
The first telethon was a week. It raised enough money to keep us going for probably another 6 months maybe, and then we did another telethon.
And as things went on, money didn't come as fast as we had hoped because we had a specific goal we were going toward. So we decided to go later. And then we started going earlier. And then we started going, through the weekends and so forth. But one of the telethons lasted 40 days before we reached our goal.
It was live television in Lima, Ohio, and there was nothing else on.
We would have huge crowds of people who would come in to watch these telethons.
So what we tried to do was develop the telethons into short segments, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes shorter. I guess like Top 40 Radio. If you don't like what you're hearing right now, stay tuned because it's going to change pretty quickly.
We always felt that the telethons were a place to show off high production value, live music, and big sets. And big sets can be a challenge, but fortunately, Lisa Bowers knew a guy.
Then we found out there was this guy who at the time was working at a cemetery. It was Lisa Bowers' brother, Kevin.
The talent had joy, the people on the phones had joy, the volunteer, everyone had joy. And I thought that was really something that stood out to me, which actually led me to feel confident, and really the trust was there where I could call in and receive Christ.
He came in, and not only did he dress the sets we had, he was able to create complete sets that just blew us away.
The fact that our studio was an air hangar created all kinds of possibilities. That's why I loved making sets. And I remember having the opportunity to go out to Los Angeles. One of the designers of the Academy Awards and the Olympic ceremonies led me and Nelson Augsburger around to these various studios like ABC, NBC. So we brought those ideas back to Lima and integrated into them to our sets that we did here in the studio.
I mean, those first few years we were really learning the ropes, but those live telethons really taught us so much about how to do and not do television production.
To God, praise with the Spirit and with understanding. Oh, magnify the Lord.
We didn't really like to do them because they really were draining. However, they really did give us access to people, and better yet, our viewers got access to us.
Oh yeah, music was a great part of TV 44.
My name's Jim Bodecker, and I had the pleasure to be a part of Channel 44 for many years. Playing on 44 was a real blessing for our music and our outreach. I mean, local artists got to take their music to thousands of people that they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to do.
Sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Where could I go but to the Lord?
I always talk about this time that I was producing a telethon, and Bash and the Code came in from Philadelphia, and when they showed up, they didn't look at all like their promotional pictures.
Bash and the Code, which was also known as Found Free, was, get this, a Christian new wave band out of Philadelphia.
When they got off the bus, we looked at this and thought, all right, how do we get out of this situation?
They had purple hair and mohawks and everything else in the late 80s.
They were walking around the hallways, and Ron called Lisa Bowers in his office and says, "Who are these people in our hallways?"
And I was really worried what Ron was going to say. He was going to say, no way were we putting on these people in the air. And he was very calm about it, and he said, let's give them a chance. And that night really rocked when they gave their testimonies and people were calling in and accepting Christ as their Savior because of things that this band shared.
But you know what? Ron had a heart for people, and he thought if we alienate a certain portion of our audience, so be it. Because these people really believed in the Lord, and they wanted to share His love, and that's what they did.
Ron loved to bring in people from his era. He brought in Rosie Greer.
We need this television station to be on the air. Be bold, be strong. Lord thy God is with thee. Be bold, be strong.
Telethon was never solely about raising money. It was about praying for people. We would get calls out of the blue that I would think, I'm so grateful and surprised that this person is watching right now.
As I was watching your telethon this evening, and I saw these two ladies praying for this girl that is fighting for her life because she did have an abortion. And the Lord spoke to me in a real way. And He showed me how wrong I was to hold the view that I did, that abortion was a political issue. It was a woman's right. It was okay. And I called in to tell everyone at the station I was sorry and to ask their forgiveness. I am behind 44 100%.
I want to thank you, and you have my forgiveness, and for everyone in earshot here who forgives her, let's hear it.
It was such an honor to be a part of that process, to be a part of those phone calls.
We're overwhelmed by this crowd.
It's hard to believe.
2 times we closed out our telethons doing a live event from the Lima Mall. It was huge.
When we did the telethon at the Lima Mall with Pat Boone, I mean, that was a big deal for the community.
I'm blessed that literally thousands of people have given into this ministry and made it possible.
Behind me here is the Victory Club. Say Victory Club. Yes, we have, all right, we have, stop saying it now.
Those telethons, they're out of fashion now, but they were sure fun while they lasted.
But there was a lot of shenanigans.
Are we rolling? Okay.
John Ondo here had a plant in his office. At the time, it seemed like we had so many staff members named Bob. And he had a plant, and he just named the plant Bob. And then Bob the plant died.
There was a basketball hoop out back, close to the tower. So we named that the Bob Plant Memorial Coliseum after the plant died.
Barry? Let's win this for Bob Plant. That's, I think, is the overall feeling of everyone here.
Wasn't that a shot? Did you get that shot? I'll tell you.
We would play basketball a lot. We would be outside, especially during the summer, and the pigs stunk.
There were some hog farmers in the area, so there were times when you pulled in that it wasn't like the sweet aroma of the gospel.
The pigs definitely stunk.
Excuse me, there's somebody more important than you on the other line. Oh, well, thank you.
I mean, it was a family atmosphere. It was a clubhouse.
The sign outside, if you ever drove down Beatty Road, you probably saw it. It was called the Cheese Wedge sign because I guess it came from a business that was called the Cheese Wedge.
Bob Placey would call us a clubhouse, but we really did have a name for the office. It was called the Oasis.
We all worked together, but we laughed a lot. We goofed off probably way more than we should.
And that talented group of people went on not only to make a difference at TV 44, but ultimately all over the nation. And they're some of my favorite people.
I think the 80s were definitely the golden years of Christian local broadcasting. When the Jimmy Swaggart scandal happened, when the Jim Bakker scandal happened, we took a real hit. And so it cost a lot of public perception, and it really changed the way people looked at Christian television.
I remember thinking to myself, finances, females, and fame. Finances, females, and fame. Those were the three things that seemed to take down ministries.
But I think Channel 44 stood strong because people knew who the people were here.
As people, as on-air talent, we wanted to be authentic.
They saw our lives in the community outside of television.
They would say, you know, I know you, you're from Christian TV, and that was a joy.
And they knew that we were not driving around in fancy Cadillacs, and we were not in big mansions, and we were using the money for the gospel.
I think that God wants us to live with the people and for the people, because that's where the gospel is. God brought the gospel for the people.
TV 44 needed a program that would be theirs, that would be identifiable in the community.
We used the 700 Club as a model for much of that, knowing that there were powerful stories in our community about what God was doing in individual lives. Ultimately, that resulted in Turning Point, a daily half-hour program, which was very, very unusual for a station this size.
Turning Point, bringing you information and inspiration.
This has been a long time in the planning. Turning Point is an answer to a lot of prayer and a lot of steadfast support from you folks out there, and I'm really glad you're there.
I was sitting content somewhere else, and I believe that through prayers, God just literally plucked me out of where I was and said, I want to do a great work in Lima through a daily ministry program, and that's why I'm here.
They did it very, very well. I was proud of them. I was proud of that show.
We need to be dealing with the problems. Why kids don't feel important, why the self-esteem isn't there, why they collapse to peer pressure.
Of course, Lisa Cherry came from Minneapolis.
Lisa had a great singing voice, so music was a big part of the show.
Bob Shuck from Findlay, Barry Boardman, who's in Texas now and was a terrific director.
So about a year later, Lisa Cherry got a job offer from back home to go be a part of this new thing called the Home Shopping Network.
Lisa Krahler then took over as co-host.
Then she fell in love, got married, and moved to Minnesota.
And so Darla Ozan stepped in as co-host.
And then she fell in love and got married and moved to California.
A lot of people met their spouses here for some reason.
So that opened the door for Ginger Stocky, who was already married to Tim and a very talented producer, to move into the co-host position.
When I first interviewed, my legal name is Jennifer Stocky, but I have always gone by Ginger my entire life. That's what my parents called me from the day I was born. So when I went to interview with Ron Mile, he said, so your name is Jennifer, do you go by Jenny? And I said, no, actually I go by Ginger, it's just what I've always been called. And he said, well, we're not going to call you that. He said, I have a daughter named Jenny and I really like the name Jennifer, so how about you go by that? And I said, okay.
I could tell right away that Ginger had a lot going for her.
And I remember the first story I put together for Turning Point. And Lisa Kraler was the main producer, one of the main producers working with Lisa Cherry on the show at the time. And she took a look at it and I was kind of nervous. And she said, I wouldn't change a thing. And that was such a big point in my career. I'm so grateful to Lisa for that.
Because I felt like she had such a great future. I guess I kind of predicted it, as she's now with Joyce Meyer Ministries, but she has been such a great influence.
So Bob and I were together on Turning Point for many years. I was beginning to have children, and so I was able to take the show and point it toward young moms and to talk about things that were also happening in the community that affected families.
I wanted to do more stories, so I moved over to the Turning Point team as a producer and also doing some reporting.
So our whole point was connecting with people in a way that says no matter who you are, no matter what you're going through, God loves you and we want to help draw you closer to Him.
No one is perfect.
Sure.
But you believe that it was God's grace.
Sure.
That really kept you. How does that work?
Well, basically, yeah, it was God's grace.
It was around that time we began to realize to be effective at ministry, we needed to build a real relationship with our viewers, and that's what we did.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
As the networks continue to bring you all the facts, the figures, and the speculation about what's going on in the Gulf, we here at TV 44 and Turning Point want to be an encouragement.
With Iraq and Israel and the Scud missiles going back and forth, and one huge mistake could have started what we would have called the Third World War, Armageddon.
And right now, Jennifer Stocky is going to join us to give us a perspective on how this crisis is affecting one local family.
Locally, families with loved ones in the Gulf are clinging to the support that they find in prayer and in each other.
God hears both kinds of prayers. Those people who've been praying daily, when we all know we should, and those who are praying for the first time.
To these people, the Gulf is a hostile territory where their loved ones are in jeopardy.
So far, as of 0900 this morning, Washington time, there's been a single American aircraft lost.
We had all the coverage from CNN. Back then, they were really a great news source for us.
And that's when WTLW started airing 24 hours a day. It was in the Gulf War.
Right now, we're going to be going back to the White House. We will be sticking with CNN throughout the evening, but we want to remind you again to be in prayer.
We went from Kuwait burning to LA burning the following year.
If this keep on getting out of hand, we're going to have a torn nation. And we don't stop right now and try to do something about it in our little town.
I really thought I knew a lot about racial inequality. It turns out through those stories, I knew nothing.
Did you ever think that this kind of thing would ever come back up in the country again, like what we've seen in this week?
Yes, because it's really never ended. It got better, but in the last 10, 15 years, we have gone backwards.
I think a good example from the role that TV 44 played, the community pulled together a series of what we called study circles. The coverage and the attention that TV 44, I think, provided for that was helpful in fostering that. And I think that's a good example of how they used the power of their platform to make certain that people were brought together.
And I'm grateful we were able to not only educate the public, I'm glad I got to educate myself.
John says, don't move, cover the storm.
We will weather this storm to bring you coverage, complete coverage of the Allen County Fair.
Bob, though, you may not know, has a fear of bunny rabbits. It's true. We talked about it before.
Yeah, but you've never been attacked by a rabbit.
And we took our students studio ministry show out to the Allen County Fair. And maybe it didn't make sense at the time, but I'll tell you why we did it. We knew that that's where the people were.
Onion rings from Downs Concessions.
1 week a year, I got to live off deep fried food, apple dumplings, and soda. It was awesome.
What's he dressed up as?
Ham radio.
Ham radio. And you came up with this idea, right?
Bob Placey and I were on the set, and we were talking with Michelle Redmond, who was with a giant inflatable bunny.
Michelle Redmond is with a rabbit that we're going to have to keep away from Bob so he doesn't panic. Michelle?
Bob, we gave this rabbit a little growth hormones, but I'm still...
And somehow the rabbit got unplugged while she was doing the segment.
And let the little kids come up to get pictures with her. And
Buster's deflating. Luke, has Buster ever fallen down?
Not yet, but it looks like she's about to.
Maybe a Turning Point t-shirt from Company 26 will help Buster get back on her feet here.
Michelle!
I'm back
Buster,
to you guys!
Say it isn't so! He's melting!
We rebranded Turning Point into a vehicle called 44 Magazine. And that was really important because times were changing.
Of course, we always wanted to include prayer requests, and we would get stacks of prayer requests.
When we would do a show, it wasn't as much about Nielsen ratings as it was about how many prayer requests did we get? How big is this stack of prayer requests?
643 souls have come to know the Lord or rededicated their lives. And that is tremendous.
Bertha Huber ran that for years.
Thousands of prayer requests, 44,000 or more.
I just remember thinking, this is an amazing woman and I want to be like her.
Bertha was a prayer warrior. Oh gosh.
She was really a gift of God to me and to the entire region through TV 44.
TV 44, with Roger and Jeff leading the programming department, made a shift. We weren't just doing Christian programs, we were doing family programs.
Shirley Temple stars as a young waif haunting Army hospitals looking for her father.
So when I first started, I was taking Looney Tunes cartoons off of film and putting it onto tape so that we could air it. And not just those cartoons, those are the ones I remember the most.
I was working in master control and I had learned to edit, and I was editing some programs for content. Like if they said something risque or something, we would edit that out.
I just was hacking away at everything. Jetsons. I had to take out smoking.
We were just figuring things out. Jeff Milslegel, who was the program director at the time, he called me into his office and he said, "Matt, I want to ask you about something. You were responsible for taking out anything that would have been, questionable, but you left in this little scene about these two older people that were talking about sleeping together." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Why did you leave that in?" I said, "Well, because they're old. Old people don't do that."
$20. Don't think about it. It's too good of a deal to pass. Don't think. Don't.
Welcome to another adventure of Faith Fort, starring Frontier Fritch, Kimball, Loud Thunder.
Faith Fort was the brainstorm of Rich Moss and Kim Tracy. They went on a fishing trip in Michigan, and they talked about doing a kids show, and Faith Fort was born.
Well, I gave that salesman, Dandy Dan, the salesman.
Yeah.
He was here and he gave me this spiel about this land west of California or something.
But there was very few Christian, quality Christian children's shows. With some old barn signing from a friend, Dave Hawker, they built the set. Then, of course, from there, they came down to TV 44, and then production started with Faith Fort. It was just fun, and it was a collaboration with a lot of people and a lot of parts, puppets, music, and for the budget we had, I just thought it was hilarious, and it was fun to do.
Don't jump into something.
I'm telling you, just can't get money from anybody around here.
That even at that time, TV 44 was doing something that nobody else was doing.
Local sports, high school basketball. We go. You're about to witness something you ain't gonna see on NBC or CBS. I can't remember.
So I wrote a proposal saying that we could take 3 cameras, one on each end of the court on the floor, plus an overhead camera, tape the game, bring it back, and put those pieces together.
TV 44 Sports presents coverage of local high school basketball playoffs. Tonight from the Elida Fieldhouse in Elida, Ohio, the Single A District Finals, Delta St. John versus Wayne Trace.
And it was a tremendously, very exciting game, went right down to the wire. Buzzer beater, literally, of the ball was in the air when the buzzer went off, went through the basket.
Is he going to roll? Okay, Hall with the ball. He puts it up. He hits it! He hits it!
This is how I rank them. Al Michaels, the 1980 Olympic hockey team, Do You Believe in Miracles? Then number 2, Mike Shep, TV 44 Sports, He Hits It, He Hits It.
And that district final game was the game that put TV 44 Sports on the map.
Personally, I just said, we have a winner here. I hope we can make this work.
In the early days of sports production, we had an old truck. We'd go out with chicken wire, basically.
Trying to make a nuclear reactor out of coconuts and straw.
Well, we would get together, obviously fairly early Friday afternoon and start gathering the equipment we needed.
I don't know if I'd use the word gathered. I'd say we more like pillaged the station on Fridays.
And we had microphones up on the baskets so you could hear the ball hit the rim. And the community really supported our efforts.
Lima Senior versus Camp McKinley and that double overtime thriller, and then Lima Senior going on to win that game.
I think they brought a level of excitement to that sports coverage that few were able to match.
And these communities are built around family, school, and church.
We were kind of creating, much like the old ABC Monday Night Football, a culture around our high school sports. And we thought we'd take it up a notch. We brought in Jim Bodecker.
Priorities and let's so coward clear to one and all. It's God, family, country, and high school basketball.
Another high school conference confrontation is underway. Get back in your easy chair and watch with us the play-by-play. Yeah, we'll be here with you until the action stops. We'll make sure that you see every tick of the clock. Priorities in the slow cow clear to one and all. It's God, family, country, and high school basketball.
You know, and I remember reading letters from women saying their husband would never watch TV 44, but when they started covering sports, they started watching it. That was groundbreaking. It was so important, and it really became something important to the community and important to who WTLW-TV was.
And TV 44 sports coverage grew even larger, but you're going to have to wait another 20 years to find out about that.
High school basketball. High school basketball.
You know, I mean, you live your own life, you make your own decisions.
Do you care about the influence you have on people coming behind you? Younger brothers or sisters or younger friends?
No.
I saw these programs coming in from Channel 44 that I thought were incredibly unique, that were different from what everybody else was doing, straight talk, and I thought this is the kind of thinking I like. So I went to visit them, I got to see the studios, and like I say, they didn't have big budgets, but they were making the most of what they had.
One of the things that a lot of Christian TV stations never did was got involved with their local teenage audience. TV 44 was always set on let's reach young people for Christ as well.
That was one of those things where we saw a need for teens in the community. And so we started jumping in and saying, okay, what can we do?
Hi, my name's Kim. I'm a junior at Siegel High School. I love rock and roll, and I think it has no damaging on today's youth.
Life's for my own to live my own way. I believe that people should adhere to that, and we should be able to live the life that we want to live.
The idea was to gather 6 or 7, 8 teenagers on these crates. I would moderate, and we would try to get Christian and non-Christian kids on. give them a topic that the audience would probably go, don't let the teenagers talk about that. We give them that kind of a topic and then let them go for an hour.
Straight Talk was created by Turning Point director Barry Boardman and Bob Placey.
People said, you can't do a show like that. Who's going to watch a show with, especially in the evening, and it's going to be live with teenagers? You have no idea what they'll do.
Let me ask people, is that a crime not to be Christian? Can I believe in any other religion? Apparently, no.
We did a show on rock and roll in Ohio Northern, had this place packed with college students.
Just raise your hands, man. How many of you really believe in a real, actual hell?
Teens were flooding into this Christian TV station who knew nothing about Jesus.
Well, soon Straight Talk took on almost a life of its own. It went from producing it once a month live to we produced it weekly live. I mean, it was a big undertaking for both Barry and me and the crew, and we got some help from a lot of people like Kenny Price.
I'm your host, Kenny Price, and tonight we got an incredible show. This is our last night, and we're ending up our whole month of February talking about sex. Does AIDS scare you guys? Does AIDS scare you? Really, tell me.
Yeah, AIDS scares me, you know.
I had the honor of producing Straight Talk with Dr. Mike Romanowski. Mike is a professor, so he understood student culture, so we felt we should leave no topic unturned.
About a year and a half ago, I built a coffin at school, and I've been sleeping in it ever since.
Tonight, what is goth? We're watching Straight Talk from Teens.
We found a teen who was into goth, so much so that he said he was a vampire and actually built a coffin in shop class. We had him on the show.
Yeah, any interest in, is vampirism? Any interest in that cause?
Yeah, I have an interest in vampirism. I am a vampire.
What does that mean if you say you're a vampire?
A lot of people think that vampires are immortal, and truthfully, a vampire is just someone that has a taste for blood.
We found college students who were struggling with same-sex attraction while attending a Christian college.
Say it started when I was maybe as young as 5 or 6.
How did you view men at that point?
Scary. You know, that they weren't to be trusted, they didn't keep their word.
Why, did you think it was normal at that time?
Yeah, you know, kind of how you grow up in your family, you just assume everybody else's family's the same way.
In spring of '99, 12 students and 1 teacher were gunned down in Littleton, Colorado. We know it now as Columbine. I went to Kevin Bowers the next day and said, let me fly to Colorado with the cameras and see if we can find stories of hope that we could share on Straight Talk. He didn't hesitate a second, he said yes.
The shooters on April 20th thought they silenced Rachel Scott forever, but instead, Rachel's message was proclaimed to the whole world.
I guess I just see them as being very heroic in what they did, because they gave up, you know, everything just because of their faith in God and stuff. And I knew Rachel would do it. I knew she had it in her to be that way.
I was on the campus of Columbine High School within 48 hours of the shooting, and the stories we came back with were incredible.
And what she would say to everybody is that no matter what their struggles are, God just gives us a reason to live. And I mean, if you're not living full force for God, then, you know, it's almost like what's the point?
I think that's probably that's one reason that I just respect her so much, and I think it's the coolest thing about her life is that even though she had all these struggles, she never stayed down when she struggled with things. If she messed up, she got back up, and she kept pursuing God.
A few weeks later, we partnered with Lima Land Teens for Christ for an evangelistic event where we showed some of these stories from Columbine, and over 100 teens gave their lives to Christ.
Seeing the impact that it made on kids in the area, it was really exciting. And also seeing other stations taking a look and saying, wow, if they do something like that, we can too. And I think it spread and made a difference. There's an opportunity to get really in-depth, and that's when we started doing more long-form things outside of Turning Point and started doing documentaries.
A landscape of deserted-looking buildings, boarded and barred windows. Here life is volatile, poor, and seemingly hopeless.
We went to Cleveland, to the heart of the inner city, to one of the roughest areas.
In this neighborhood, Sister Goldie White is celebrating the 10th anniversary of her storefront church. Her space may be small, the work is anything but.
You know, I see young people, I see old people out there on the street, early in the morning, raggedy, filthy, and dirty, looking for dope.
The police came and said, hey, you guys have got to get out of here right now. You learn a lot about other people's lives, and you learn a lot about the important stories to tell.
I picked up this story. It was a local newspaper guy who was following a person with AIDS. He was writing these segments in the newspaper. I thought, we could do that. We could have a crew follow somebody around and tell their story.
And he brought it to me one time and said, I want us to do something that will humanize AIDS, that will help us to know the people behind it.
When she said that I had AIDS, and that's just the way she said, the first thing popped in my mind, I can't have AIDS. And she left. I've asked several different churches and different ministers, would I be welcome to come to their church? And the answer has always been inevitably no. We don't want somebody with AIDS in our church.
Clinton Engel was a homosexual man with AIDS. When I first met him over 5 years ago, I wasn't sure what to expect, but it didn't take long to realize that he wasn't a militant activist, nor was he a martyred saint. He lived in a small town. He had a family. During those 5 years, he shared with me his most painful and vulnerable moments.
And he says, you're going to follow me everywhere I go, with my kids, with my former spouse, with my current lover. And Jennifer says, yeah, we'll do that. He eventually passed. We produced a documentary called AIDS, the Heart of the Matter.
My significant other asked me today, why I don't want a birthday this year. And it's hard to explain why. You don't know how many more birthdays you got left.
I learned about friendship. I learned about people that you don't think you have anything in common with, but you find out that you do. I learned about deep, deep hurts that people are going through that I would have never understood without him sharing his with us. I learned a lot about myself and about loving other people, and then I learned about God's love for people.
He rededicated his life. Now, Clint had been Catholic, and that was a controversial thing with our audience. He had been Catholic. He came back to the Lord. Beautiful ending. And I took more flack for that documentary than anything else I've ever had in my life. Clint was pretty well rejected by the church. We got calls from pastors. We got calls. I got threats from people that they were going to go to their church and make sure they never gave another dime to this station, because we had the heart to tell this story. I don't want to say it, but the church doesn't like it when you scratch a scab, because it does expose us sometimes. It exposes us as Christians to what we should be.
And we began to be pushed to get outside into where people were really living. And that was part of Bob Placey's vision.
If we were looking at ourselves, we're looking at ourselves through that lens saying, we need to do better.
This group of people know the truth about God, and they simply want to communicate it because the Lord said, go into all the world and share my good news with everyone.
Take a trip with us to a Russian Bible study. This is the room where the study will be held. Strips of 1x8s held up by stools will be the pews.
John Ondo, one of our producers, was traveling in Eastern Europe and doing documentaries there.
American missionaries came to this country under cloak and dagger conditions. In the southern country of Zambia, a different type of revolution is underway, and it has the whole world watching its president and his bold stand he's taken to break the chains for his country. God is doing amazing things here in the church in Romania, and that's why we're here. We now return to a Turning Point special report, Target Croatia. This country's history has been plagued with one governmental disaster after another, with the climactic event being when the country itself was dedicated to Satan by its own leaders. I mean, I'm just a kid who grew up just down the road from the TV station. I never went anywhere, and I'm on Red Square sharing the gospel. Only God could pull that kind of stuff off.
Jennifer was doing documentaries in China.
Sunday morning in Beijing, a day like any other. Here, no church steeples adorn the skyline. You'll hear no church bells beckoning people to their places of worship. Our group, however, is privileged to go to church today, a church where ID is checked at the door.
And it was that documentary about the church in China that brought an Emmy back to that small station in the cornfield.
We were doing things that local television stations didn't do.
Bob Armistead was a part of TV 44, and he instantly became part of my family. And he ended up doing financial planning, left TV 44, never left our family. They were always still a big part of our family. And we basically lived our lives with them. And then one day, one of the most devastating things that I've ever dealt with, we got the call that Bob had taken his own life. It was an incredible shock. And just thinking, this isn't real. I can't believe that this has happened. And then being very angry at God and thinking, God, how did this happen? Why didn't you stop it? Well, how does this happen to someone who loves you so much, to someone who's doing so much good, to someone who means so much to my kids? How does something like this happen? It's really hard to see anything good coming out of something that terrible. But God did allow us to tell his story and share with other people the value of their life, hopefully before they got to that point to reach out for help.
Did you have any idea that Bob was hurting as much as he was?
No, that's the greatest sadness. I don't think any of us did we? When you look back and you think about it, that's, I think, the part that hurts the most, is that he must have been in such tremendous pain.
It was 25 years ago, and suicide was not something that was really discussed at that time. It's still controversial. People still kind of don't speak of it.
That's the power of this medium. That's the power of television, of telling a story that connects with people's hearts. These documentaries and these things that we share are life-changing.
Well, I think all the Wisners were very unique people. We'll just put it that way.
And Dwight was a musician. He knew audio. He knew that end of things.
I met Dwight the day we signed on the air, and he was a polar opposite of the stereotypical Christian you probably think of. Long hair, he played bass in a band, he liked Star Trek, he liked blowing up stuff. He was just a lot of fun, and he was a creative force to be reckoned with at TV 44. Dwight did a lot of things, but his primary focus was sound. So I was with him building a new audio room when he got a call from someone telling him that his wife Laura had been in an accident with a drunk driver. She was life-flighted to Toledo, and that's when Dwight found out that she was in the early stages of pregnancy as well. She had good days and she had bad days over several weeks, but finally she went on to be with the Lord. Dwight was remarkable. He kept his faith. He kept volunteering at the station. And a few years later, he met one of our camera operators by the name of June.
When I first saw Dwight, I thought, wow, there's a hippie.
Dwight and June loved music, and they loved Christian rock.
I had a vision for a Christian radio station in Lima that would meet the needs of the young people. And then in 1988, a frequency became available in Lima, and incidentally, it's the last one that's available. And we filed for it, and just a few weeks ago, we got our construction permit for the station. So we have the go-ahead to build the thing.
We were to the point where we needed to come up with call letters. We saw WLMB, and we thought, Lamb. Jesus, he's our Lamb of God.
And I'll tell you what, TV 44 and Ron, man, we got behind that.
In 1992, Dwight had a seizure. We found out in the wee hours that he had a brain tumor.
And I remember visiting him with my dad a couple of times, and this vibrant man was just, he was reduced down to the shell of what he was.
Dwight went on to be with the Lord in 1994. He was in his mid-30s, and I had to ask the Lord, why does somebody who loves you and serves you so much have to go through so much pain in his life?
People sit back and say, oh, how does that happen in a ministry?
That is the question man has been asking for millennia, is why do bad things happen to good people? And the offshoot of that is, why would a loving God allow those things to happen?
When you claim to be His, He has the right to your life. I don't see that a lot nowadays with people. They seem to think their life is their own.
I recently lost my wife to COVID, and that comes on top of the fact that 25 years ago I lost my first wife due to a brain aneurysm.
Back in 2017, I was diagnosed with cancer.
She loves going out in the cold of winter for a rainy football game or snowy football game, and putting on the jacket and standing out there on the sideline.
We are not grand poobah amazing people just because we're on television. We have no problems. No, we still have those problems, but we have Jesus.
Why do we get up and keep doing this even in the face of adversity and difficulty and hardship? Because of the opportunity and the joy we have to share the gospel and to see it change people's lives.
The power of Christian television along these lines of our struggles daily is the fact that you can turn on that TV and very often you'll hear a minister that'll chime in on something that you are very attuned to because you're going through it right now.
I didn't think that maybe what I was going through would help someone else.
God has not forgotten you. God has not abandoned you, because he sent me here to tell you that and to share it with you and to walk with you through what you're going through and to see that change their lives. That's worth any amount of suffering and hardship I think we go through in this life.
Here's where my God is. I think December of 2017, I was diagnosed with cancer. A medical pro told my wife, better get your things in order, get your house in order, because typically people in his condition only live about 18 months. Well, here it is, over 3 years, and I've still got tread on my tire. So that's where my God is when trouble hits. We live in a fallen world, and the wages of sin is death, and our body's going to die. So tough things do happen. But we have the hope that there is life after this body dies. So that's where my God is. And he loved me so much that he would literally die for me. So that's where my God is.
It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
And I think that much of the ministry that takes place comes in our darkest of times. And so when you're on the radio, you're on television, you see that there's an audience of broken people, of hurting people, and you want to share with them the same hope that you have received yourself.
Well, Ron found out that there was a frequency available for Toledo, and he just thought we should go for it.
What we discovered is due to FCC regulations, we couldn't own another market like that. And he made the decision to move on to Toledo.
We can bring the gospel message into Toledo through TV 40. Seize the opportunity and join in as we reach Toledo with Christ's good news.
Ron was really tenacious. Ron loved to start things.
Some of the battles we had here at WTLW when Ron was getting this station started were kind of minuscule compared to what he faced up in Toledo.
And I was stuck for a while. And when I met Ron, it was in a exodus period. There was nothing happening. Not for 1 month, not for 3 months, not for 6 months, not for a year, for 2 years. It was a long, dry desert.
About the same time Ron was in the desert getting TV 40 started was about the same time that we lost the dream for Christian rock radio in Lima because Dwight had passed. But Ron had a special favor to ask June before Dwight's funeral.
He asked me if I would mind them using the call letters that we had chosen for our station, WLMB, for Channel 40. And there's no question, of course. It blesses me even now, knowing that WLMB lived on.
You're watching WLMB TV 40, Toledo's Christian station.
And Ron Mile was my mentor that taught me so much about broadcasting that, we are celebrating, 20 plus years here now at WLMB TV 40 Toledo, which he founded. Quite frankly, I don't know of another man on planet Earth that would have persevered to make sure that what God had called him to do would come to fruition.
Late night network television really changed in the early 90s because Johnny Carson retired and it shook up the whole landscape. Everybody was trying to get a talk show on.
And a guy named Rush Limbaugh was really getting popular.
And he was on the radio, but he came out with a TV show, and we thought, hey, this will attract an audience.
We were at that point, we actually had a period of time where we were subscribing to Nielsen ratings. And it was easy to see. We were really competing, even with local news, with putting this particular show on.
I was getting counsel from Ron Mile at that time. He was in Toledo saying, Bob, this is a mistake.
But the other thing it was a little difficult. We had to make sure we previewed the show constantly. And there was a growing kind of discontent that maybe this isn't what the station should be doing.
Rush got into some things that really we didn't want to be that polarizing. That was part of the problem, was polarizing even the body of Christ. I was getting information from different areas, and some of them were pastors saying, Bob, this is polarizing, and you should cancel it. And I did.
Bob made the difficult decision and lived with those consequences and the costs to the ministry because a few advertisers never advertised with TV 44 again.
We had made all sorts of national news. I know even Chuck Colson had a thing on his radio show promoting us, so we did the right thing, taking it off.
I respect a guy like Bob for doing that.
Yeah, he had some political views that a lot of our audience supported. At the same time, he said some things that were very insulting to the other side. He said some things that were very polarizing, and would Christ do that? And that was the thing that continued to gnaw at me. And we can't choose our politics over our Christian testimony, and that's what it taught me.
Welcome to 44 Final Edition. I'm Brad Schultz.
And I'm Lisa Kraler. Topping our news tonight, the city is trying to keep the YMCA downtown.
We're a local station. There was one other local TV station doing news at that time. We've got the facilities, we've got the people, we've got the talent, and we decided to do news.
And now for the final edition of the 44 News Hour.
That was a long, complicated process.
One of the things we realized about starting news was it was a separate corporation almost.
And so we began building this news team.
I was living and working in TV news in Iowa, and my contract was coming up. And I very much enjoyed TV, but at the same time, I was thinking, God's given me these gifts and these abilities, and I started to think, how can I use them for Him? I happened to come across an advertisement that TV 44 in Lima, Ohio, which I didn't even know where it was looking to start a news program. And I thought, that really makes a lot of sense to me.
The team that was assembled was incredible.
I got the phone call that, hey, would you be interested in, helping start a news program here? I was more than thrilled. And at that point, we'd already decided to move back to Ohio.
So that was the immediate challenge, was how do you create something literally from nothing?
A lot of people would be surprised to know that we were once a CNN news affiliate.
On our microphone flags, it said TV 44 on one side and it said CNN on the other.
Well, I was brought in to co-anchor the news, but at the same time, kind of run the sports department, which was my background.
When I moved to Lima and it was at a Christian station, I felt there was something bigger going on, something bigger than me.
Previous summer, I had worked with a man named Brad Schultz. I had interned at KCRG TV9 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I moved to Lima, Ohio in the summer of 1994 to serve as an intern in the news department. I grew up in a Christian home, but I really wasn't a Christian at the time. And I remember sitting in little meetings and hearing about how incredible God was and that he was really our friend. And so I know that TV44 was so instrumental in leading me to a real relationship with Jesus Christ.
But look how that move impacted her life and what she's done with that going forward. So a small success story, I guess you'd call it.
So we're trying to have that whole balance of being, newsworthy and unbiased and make the right decisions. I'm really proud of what we did here with news.
Lima mayoral candidates had a chance to do some campaigning today. David Berger and Tom McNamara presented their issues at the first of 10 community forums.
2 weeks ago, the City of Lima and the YMCA put the finishing touches on a new project. Their efforts were unveiled today.
Collider ranks 7th in Division 2 and in cross country. Bluffton number 1 in Division 3.
In fact,
and
Todd
splits
Carter
up.
joins us now
Stand by
live
to
from the
QM,
fairgrounds
stand
with a
by
report
run
on the
DVE,
today's opening festivities.
and QM.
Todd.
For the most part, it really worked. Our problem was we just could not seem to sell it.
We were up against a NBC affiliate that had been there for 30 years. And that's who everybody turned to at 6 o'clock to get their news.
So I think sometimes we had a perception of ourselves of being the little guy.
The day we had to pull the plug on the news, that was a very hard day. I had to tell 10 people, that they didn't have a job anymore.
It had everything to do with TV44 would be led into bankruptcy if we did not make this difficult decision, and that difficult decision was to end news.
The people at the station wanted to keep it going as long as they could, but at some point, the bottom line is the bottom line.
And it's hard when something you believe in doesn't go the way that you wanted it to.
In some ways was like cutting off your arm to save the rest of the body. That's kind of what we had to do.
People will ask sometimes, you started news, it's very expensive, and then you stopped news, you canceled news. Why would God call you to do that if it was going to get canceled, if it was going to be a failure? I don't think news was ever a failure.
It's hard to move forward, but God's got other things. It doesn't mean that you wasted your time. It doesn't mean that you didn't do the right thing. It just means that for that time and that season and that community, that was what we were supposed to be doing.
TV44 did not operate and has not operated in a way that sought to carve up the community. I think its general focus has been even-handed. It's been an attempt to serve the community in a broad way and call people to a general sense of how we can act in a healing way and deal with legitimate community needs.
By the year 2000, there was a new mountain TV44 had to climb. Mandated by the FCC, TV44 would have to change its entire broadcast operation to digital by 2009.
It was the same as starting the station all over again. It was bring somebody in who could handle that transition, and Kevin was the guy.
And that was just a full measure of trust that God was going to provide.
We had to launch very high dollar capital campaigns, things that Kevin was able to visualize and recognize were necessary in order to move us on.
What amazes me is that the challenge of moving from analog to digital was just a mountain. And yet in the end, we had this hard deadline from the FCC, and TV44 ended up being one of the first stations in the United States to convert.
And this is a momentous and historical day here at Channel 44 and for broadcasting.
Yes, it is. Today is the day we shut off the analog transmitter.
Goodbye, Mr. Analog.
When we rebuilt the TV station to keep up with technology, and we're still here.
Some of my favorite nights were when you would drive through town in the fall and you'd see the football stadium lights. And you knew the whole town, all 2,000 people or all 500 people were at that stadium.
Based on your calling, based on your vision, based on your gifts and talents, what are the low-hanging fruit? What is that audience out there that we are perfectly placed to reach?
Okay, what is our niche? And it became sports.
The following is a presentation of TV44 Sports.
8 area divers qualifying for state yesterday in the Division II district meet. Finley trying to add to that number in the D1 final.
Really, Sports Report was an offshoot of our local news broadcast because instead of focusing on the total news, we wanted to focus on one aspect of it, and around here, that's local sports.
So in 2005, TV44 launched Sports Report, and our viewers got to meet 2 amazing new personalities, Mark Kuntz and Andy Lynch.
Yeah!
National Pork Rind Appreciation Day Eve!
You know, it's a sports center every night of the week, a half-hour show Tuesday through Thursday, then the hour and a half on Friday where it's all football or all basketball.
Hazelman gets a 3. Got it! Oh, my God. Wow.
You know, I'd seen a little bit how God and sports and TV could all go together, but I'd never seen it this clearly. On a Friday night, we'd send out 8 to 10 people. They'd get 3 to 4 games each. Sometimes if there was an early soccer game, you'd pick that up. Once winter came, you know, you have wrestling meets at 6 o'clock, and then basketball was a whole different animal.
Was Schmenk gonna lob it to White, catches. White, baseline move, scores!
So we'd done Sports Report several years. We had gotten some ground and some trust in the community. We'd established a base.
It was about 2008 when I started thinking about WSN being an all-sports channel.
And I said, how in the world are we going to fill that? I mean, a 24-hour network means it never goes off the air.
There's nothing quite like Friday and Saturday night in Northwest Ohio. The energy, the environments, the football fields and the basketball courts, everything that we cover has such a high element of energy. There really is no other place in the state of Ohio and to have this type of attachment, this type of energy to high school sports that Northwest Ohio does, and it's an honor for us to be able to cover it.
It was so innovative that actually when we went to the cable providers in the area and said, yeah, we'd like you to carry both of our channels in HD, they didn't have mechanisms in place for even how to answer that question. So the WSN portfolio now is expanded to 2 production trucks. Then we have 2 multicam units. Between those 4 units in-house last year, we did over 360 games.
Dribbles the ball, lost it. They get it to Brady Wheeler. Brady Wheeler takes up the rebound and knocks it in! The Indians win!
As clock expires.
You gotta be kidding me!
Nice pass, Soper to Kidd, who throws it down through contact. Boom, shakalaka.
I mean, this is my dream come true. I love sports, and I love the idea of sharing my faith.
Season 17 of the Sports Report winding to a close, but postseason action ramping up, and we are across the state tonight with postseason coverage.
The out-of-the-box thinking is truly what has allowed us to do what we do and to get where we are.
Coach Urban Meyer, it's the 3rd trip he has made, a fact that wasn't lost on Barack Obama.
And to be a ministry, I mean, sports and ministry, those aren't terms that are typically put together and probably never put together in terms of television, but here they are.
Herb Blaine died at Perry, and I got there to the school and said, anything I can do to help, let me know. They said, you need to go in and talk to the team. And who am I? I'm a sportscaster. What am I to do? And I was an FCA rep, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, but we had that unity, that relationship, and they knew that I was going to go in there and love that team and be there for them and just offer condolences, but also offer them hope in Jesus. And that happened, unfortunately, way too often. Tragedy struck so many of our different communities in the 13 and a half years that I was there. That was really hard, but God used it.
I've had the pleasure of sharing the love of Jesus at events, on the radio, in the newspaper, and here at this amazing little station in Northwest Ohio that's done so many amazing things for many, many years and will continue to do so because God's hand is all over us.
But as television has changed, TV44 has also changed. We've adapted to it.
I've been working on and off with TV44 over the past decade, and one day Kevin called me into the office and asked me the question all producers want to be asked. If you could do anything, what kind of TV show would you produce for us? I thought we really need to end this nonsense that goes on in our culture that people think the Bible is irrelevant. I think we need to talk about people's viewpoints and how the Bible is relevant and can change people's lives if you just know a little bit about it.
Kevin Bowers and I got together for lunch, and he said, John Ondo has this idea about a show called Viewpoint, and he wants to pitch it to us.
And Kevin calls me, he says, Bob Placey wants to host it, and I'm like, yeah, we're putting the band back together.
This is a program that discusses issues of faith for people looking for answers. This is Viewpoint with Bob Placey.
Today's guest is an author and former Hollywood set designer. Beckett Cook grew up with a secret. He was attracted to other men and had put himself in an accepting environment in California.
Homosexual behavior was a sin. I knew that it was no longer a part of my future, but I didn't care because I had just met Jesus, the King of the universe, and I was like, good riddance to that old life. I'm going to go with this guy. He's amazing. And that was 11 years ago.
And with Viewpoint, we sort of go back to even the original gem of straight talk from teens. Let's do topics that might make the church a little nervous.
We go in from just saying, I'm not racist, to I'm against racism, I'm anti-racism, which this implies automatically action.
Hearing the other person's
Going well,
narrative.
5 minutes in.
And if we really want to connect.
Today we're going to have a guest from South Carolina, a guest in Colorado, and a guest in Texas. This was stuff we could never do 30, 40 years ago. It would have taken satellite trucks and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it gives us an opportunity to just bring in just top quality guests.
We have to remember that God changes cultures all the time. And he almost always does it through a remnant of people.
A friend called and said that Ron Mile had passed away, and feeling a mixture of loss and sadness, but many, many sweet, fond memories just flooding over me.
It was a very tender moment for me because of all of these connections we've had. I'm glad and proud to have known him.
I thought about how much he had influenced my life and developed me as a person.
There are thousands, 10,000, maybe millions of people in heaven because of Ron Mile.
I heard the news that Ron had passed, and I couldn't believe it. I was shocked.
He was one of my best friends, mentor. Nobody could ever take his place.
I think one of the great moments was when Ron was recognized for 50 years of religious broadcasting.
We were privileged to have a job to do. The Lord gave us something we could do that he wanted done.
I've been out of God's will, I've been in God's will. You'll know it when you are. And if he gives you a job to do, do it.
This is his legacy. This is what I think of when I remember him, and I'm sure that's true of a lot of other people.
Love Ron. I've said that before, haven't I? But it's true. I did love Ron.
I just want them to know how much we appreciated everyone that came and worked and volunteered, and they're not forgotten.
Anyone could have done what I did. There's not much room for pride in that, except pride in Jesus Christ and what he stands for.
I really can't believe that it actually happened in this field in the middle of Ohio with the smell of pig farm.
The need for Christian television is never more evident today than it has ever been. We don't know where it's going, but we need people with a vision and a hunger to step forth.
We need to encourage young people to get involved, whether it be TV, radio, internet, any form of media.
God continues to use TV 44 as he has, and I don't think he's going to stop.
The gospel is good news, and we've got to make it good news. That's what the gospel means. It's good news to the world.
But media itself, God is going to continue to use it into the future. He's going to use some form of media. It's powerful. We can see it in young children's lives, how powerful it is.
Everybody's on TV today, so we really kind of have to rethink what TV is and what programming is and what Christian media is.
And we have to be relevant, and we have to be focused on Jesus, or none of the rest matters.
And so I think if we're going to ever make an impact on that world, we have to learn to speak the language of media if we're going to do it.
I am absolutely confident that broadcast television is alive and well and more effective than it's ever been.
You know, everybody says, well, radio and television like this, now it's like this diving. No. It's not like that at all. Radio and television went like this, and it leveled off. And then the internet came into play, and it's starting to level off. Then social media came into play, and it's going to level off.
I certainly understand why people would choose to go to the social media platforms. I also see a great risk in that in the future if you don't own all the infrastructure that it takes to do that.
We have to remember that we are not the dominant voice in the culture. So as long as we're online, as long as we're on social media, we have to bow to the whims of the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world. And there will always be a concern for that. But there are people, I can tell you, that are out there today trying to solve that issue and trying to figure out how do we create platforms where Christians have a real voice and never get pulled, never get censored, and are able to keep that voice alive.
What more powerful way can we share the gospel than through media?
Why is it important that this station continue for another 30 years?
Because everybody's born a sinner. And it's easier and more fun to be a non-Christian today than it ever was. And the world is crawling with people who need Christ but who don't know him.
And it's like people who say, well, I've been hurt by the church. Well, yeah, pretty much welcome to the population. Everybody has. And everybody was in the past. And the church has made a lot of mistakes. But if you make your decision about Jesus Christ based on what others have done to you, you haven't really contacted God. Tell him the truth. I was hurt by the church, which I think is you. Let me tell you something. God will tell you the truth about who he is. And Jesus Christ is the one who came and died for our sins, rose again in the flesh. We killed him, and he rose again in the flesh on the third day. And he said this to his disciples. He said, go into all the world and teach the good news. Show them what I've done for you. Every creature. So, as long as there's Christians, as long as there's people, Christian means Christ-like, as long as there's people who follow Christ, there will be people who are telling you about the good news of Jesus Christ. And the choice is yours.
It was many years ago when so many said they'll never make it. And even if they do, it surely can't last long. Well, just a humble group, common people, were moved when they saw the vision and showed they had a servant's heart when answering the call. And God changed their lives in many ways and the lives of those around. And though some barely said a word, their presence said aloud, we're still here, we're still here. By the grace of God, this far we've made it. We'll keep moving forward, step by step and day by day. We're still here, we're still here. It's in spite of us, God's hand is in it, and we'll be here until the end of day. Some faces now are gone, and others here have turned to gray, and many who had humbly served now have moved away. And though the faces might have changed, the mission and the message hasn't. And years from now, I'm sure you'll hear them say, God changed our lives in many ways, and the lives of those around. And though some barely said a word, their presence said aloud, we're still here, we're still here. By the grace of God, this far we've made it. And we'll keep moving forward, step by step and day by day. We're still here, we're still here. It's in spite of us, God's hand is in it. And we'll be here until the end of day. Yes, we'll be here until